funny cartoon that's making its way around Facebook. It's a couple of stick figures engaging in a form of call and answer chant that some of us know from justice protests. And this funny version goes, "What do we want? Better memory. When do we want it? Want what?" Today's texts make me want to modify it further. What do we want? Weakness. When do we want it? Don't you think it's ironic that after the American holiday that celebrates our being strong enough to become independent of our mother country, which was oppressing us, no taxation without representation and so on, that the Revised Common Lectionary gives us these texts to reflect upon? This may be one of the best examples of the church being and needing to remain truly countercultural. Yet it's hard for us too. As Graham Standish says of our 2 Corinthians text in the book Humble Leadership, this passage is rarely cited by Christian leaders as a model for leadership. Why not? The answer is that humans have a natural lust for power. Is it a remnant of our more primitive days when survival was all that mattered? When gaining and maintaining power meant living a longer life, obtaining more possessions, and building a greater sense of security? Actually, it's not only a remnant. Concern for survival and security lie at the heart of our lives even today and contribute to human sin. Much of human sin has to do with focusing on ourselves and our survival while we simultaneously ignore God and the welfare of others. But I understand why women in particular are attracted to a statement like this one, which shows up on social media. People cry not because they are weak, it's because they've been strong for too long. Well, women have been called weak for thousands of years, so to rationalize injustice, and the term often really rankles. So if you cry, this adage says, at least you can think, well, I have been so strong, I just need to let go sometimes. Do you think it might be possible to come to a point where you can say, no, I am weak sometimes, and we all are weak sometimes, and that's okay, because the power of Christ meets me there. Maybe that's the problem with those in the synagogue in today's gospel text. That one up, one down world is very familiar to them. And as we often say in a different adage, familiarity breeds contempt. Can't you just imagine them saying to each other, who does this guy think he is? I remember when he ran around too loudly with the other kids while he needed his nose wiped. He's getting a little uppity, isn't he? And he must be putting on an act. Otherwise, how could this change really have been happening inside him? Surely we would have seen it. I mean, his family's right here with us, and they are normal people. If the power of Christ meets us when we admit our weakness, it's no wonder that Jesus could do no deed of power there. They weren't able to meet him in that place. He was only a hometown boy doing incredible things for which they couldn't give an explanation, so they were scandalized. One of my favorite images from the Humble Leadership book is the image of lava versus water. In essence, the people in the synagogue are like lava. They first flare up with indignation, then their opinions become hardened until they are resistant to change. Standish says, do you know the difference between water and lava? Though both are liquid, their freezing points differ. It doesn't take much of a drop in temperature for lava to stop flowing and to become solid. Think about hot lava rushing downhill from the mouth of a volcano after an eruption. If it hits a big and seemingly insurmountable obstacle, it will at first try to push against it or burn it away. Its nature is to flow. Gravity compels it to flow. But if it cannot get by, through, over, or around an obstacle, it will eventually cool. As it cools, it becomes solid rock, thus making the obstacle even bigger. Lava, facing a seemingly insurmountable obstacle, becomes an obstacle itself. But water reacts to obstacles differently from lava. Water may get stuck behind a barrier for a while, but eventually it does one of three things. It finds a way around it, it rises, transcends, and overcomes it, or it erodes it. Water always searches, reaches, explores, and finds new avenues and paths. Even if it gets frozen for a season, it will eventually thaw and begin seeking an alternative way. When we're like water as leaders, we creatively seek ways around obstacles, refusing to get stuck. So let's imagine for a minute that the hometown people, with their predisposition to not accept the person Jesus has become, are like lava. They flare up in offense. They harden until the only thing to be done is to go around them. Jesus really could not do any deed of power there, except with a few sick people who were willing in their weakness to accept Jesus' healing power. But Jesus is like water, the fluid, irresistible force. He leaves that place and goes out among the other villages teaching. Then he calls the 12, sending them out 2 by 2, very lightly encumbered, with authority to cleanse like water. And like water, they find new avenues and paths. If they encounter another similar insurmountable obstacle, they simply refuse to get stuck, but free themselves of every reminder of the place as they leave, so that their liquid energy is always driving forward. A few days ago, I learned the story of another man whose vocation has led him to behave like water. His name is Dr. Gary Slutkin, and he's a very conventional physician by training, specializing in behavior modification and epidemiology. As a chief resident at San Francisco General Hospital, he focused on preventing the spread of tuberculosis. After 2 years, new cases in the surrounding area dropped by over 50%, and the rate of people completing treatment increased from 50 to 95%. He then focused on preventing the spread of TB and cholera in Somalia. He worked for the World Health Organization in Uganda, changing his focus to the prevention of HIV and AIDS. Then he returned to America, looking for another route for his water energy. Authors Alexa Clay and Kyra Maya Phillips tell his story in an article in Salon magazine. When Slutkin arrived home, he looked around and found a social problem, the problem of violence, that seemed to behave much like a contagious disease. He says in the article, "What I saw in the maps of violence I studied was characteristic clustering, just like the maps that I had seen in other epidemics such as cholera. I thought, what if we started treating violence as a contagion? One of the biggest and most insidious plagues on our society is violence. Yet too often, the discourse focuses on labeling the violent individuals as deviants or as evil," he continues. "What if we remove the labels and the judgment and began to treat violence objectively, like a disease that is transmitted and spread, much like the common cold. You can't even see bad under the microscope. There's no place in science for the concept of bad or the concept of enemy. Slutkin created an organization called Cure Violence, which has as its goal the interruption of violence. Trained outreach workers called violence interrupters, who are often former violent offenders and former convicts themselves. They are called in when there is a violent situation brewing or when there is severe bullying. According to Clay and Phillips, one violence interrupter was working with a group preparing for a revenge killing when he got a call about another conflict building nearby. He asked the first group of guys to go over and help him with the other group. He solicited their advice in getting the second group to calm down. He got their minds totally fixed on helping the second group and forgetting about their own problems. In employing them to help with the second group and listen to their problems, he also got them to disassociate from what they were dealing with and adopt a different perspective. The development of Cure Violence and the training of the violence interrupters sounds like a waterway to change the course of the violence of intimidation and retaliation. If Jesus found that the best way to find and cure the unclean spirits was to leave the unprofitable places and find the places where he could make a difference, along with equipping his disciples to find places where they could make a difference, Dr. Slutkin is doing something similar on a social scale. He's helping people prone to choose violence to seek their security and enhance their survival in an alternative way, the way that leads to life. Now you might say, we don't all have skills or calling like that. I don't know how my weaknesses and dependence on Christ can flow like water in that way and bring health and vitality where I am. Or you might think, I have real personal problems that hinder my being able to make much of a difference. Pastor Nadia Bolz-Weber at the ELCA youth gathering in New Orleans a few years ago spoke eloquently and powerfully about her drug and alcohol abuse as a teen and young adult, saying that God rudely interrupted her journey towards self-destruction. And at the end of her talk, she told the thousands of youth who were present, before I leave, I want to tell you about this God. This God will use you. This God will use all of you. And not just your strengths, but your failures and your failings and your brokenness. And God's strength is perfected in human weakness. So your brokenness is fertile ground for a forgiving God to make something new and to make something beautiful. So don't ever think that all you have to offer is your gifts. I invite you to pray and think about your own brokenness and weakness. And imagine how the power of Christ, that water power of baptism that flows in us and seeks to bring life and health in his name, might work in and through you for the sake of the world.